The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Order. Before we begin, can I remind members that they are expected to wear face coverings when they are not speaking in the debate. This is in line with current government guidance and that of the House of Commons Commission. I remind members that they are asked by the House to have a COVID lateral flow test twice a week if coming onto the parliamentary estate. This can be done either at the testing centre in the House or at home. Please also give each other and members of staff space when seated and when entering and leaving the room. I call Christina Rees to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and it's always a pleasure to serve under you as Chair. I beg to move that this House is considered E-petition 587654 Reggie's Law to regulate online animal sales. The petition closed with over 109,000 signatures and asks that, given how many animals that are sold online, we want the government to introduce regulation of all websites where animals are sold. Websites should be required to verify the identity of all sellers and for young animals for sale. Pictures of their parents be posted with all listings. I volunteered to lead on this petition because my daughter had a dog called Reggie. He was part of our family for many years and we loved him so much that we broke our hearts when he tragically died from cancer. I met with the petitioner Richard, who told me that he started this petition after he's bought his 12-week-old Labrador puppy Reggie through a reputable website for his partner for Christmas, and then realised that he had unknowingly contributed to illegal puppy farming. Richard is with us in the public gallery tonight. Richard bravely concedes that he should have done more research before buying Reggie and should have walked away, which would have prevented the seller getting more money to continue acts of animal cruelty. But Reggie would still have died. Richard gave Reggie love, dignity and pain relief throughout his very short life. Reggie fell ill 12 hours after Richard took him home and died from parvovirus after 2 days. When Richard bought Reggie, he thought that Reggie was from St Helens, Merseyside, but when he went back to the address where he bought Reggie, he found that the seller had gone. The microchip number for Reggie did not match the documentation, and it was registered to Dublin, Ireland. So Richard believes that Reggie was illegally shipped to the UK. Richard started Justice for Reggie to raise awareness of the dangers of online animal sales, and it is part of the Animal Welfare Alliance, which he also set up, made of some animal websites. Richard would like the government to establish a regulatory board to regulate all animal sales websites, and that these websites should be verified before they are set up. Richard would like it to be a legal requirement to have pictures of puppies suckling on their mother and identify online sellers, in that every seller should produce a photo ID and 2 proof of address documents to prove from whom and from where the pet is sold. Last week, Richard walked 200 miles from his home in Wigan to hand in a petition to the Prime Minister at 10 Downing Street. And I know that some members speaking in the debate tonight met Richard at Downing Street to show their support. The government responded to Reggie's Law on the 1st of July 2021 and said that the government shares the public's high regard for animal welfare. We endorse the Pet Advertising Advisory Group, that's PAG's, work and support their actions to improve the traceability of online vendors, and mentioned the UK government's pet fishing campaign and said that the Kept Animals Bill will end puppy smuggling, includes new powers to introduce new restrictions on pet travel and the commercial imports of pets on welfare grounds, implemented through secondary legislation, and that the UK government's Pet Theft Task Force is considering different measures to stop pet theft, including the regulation of online sales, a voluntary code of practice, a certification scheme for compliant websites to encourage sites to increase checks, and sales should be cashless to improve traceability. Also, that DEFRA plan to launch an online advertising programme to assess whether they need to strengthen the regulatory framework around online advertising, with a consultation expected before the end of this year. And I'm sure that members are aware that animal welfare is a devolved matter. There is no specific legislation regarding acquiring a pet online, but there are the Animal Welfare Licensing of Activities Involving Animals England Regulations 2018, which cover, amongst other things, dog and cat breeding and selling animals as pets, licensed by local authorities. Dog breeding is defined as 3 or more litters a year, or regarded as a business by a local authority. And selling animals as pet covers selling and selling on, whether bred by the seller or not. The regulations require an advertisement for an animal sale to include the licence number, the licensing authority, the age, plus a photo of the animal, the country of origin and residence, and the animal must be in good health. Dogs must be sold in the presence of the purchaser and from the premises they are kept. In April 2020, Lucy's Law amended these regulations to prohibit the commercial sale of dogs and cats under 6 months, other than by the breeder. But these regulations do not apply to private animal sellers. Perhaps the Minister would consider amending to include private sales. I have met with a number of animal organisations to listen to their views on animal online sales, and there was broad support for reform. PAG was set up in 2001 to combat growing concerns about irresponsible advertising of pets for sale, rehoming and exchange, and is made up of 25 animal welfare organisations, trade associations, veterinary bodies, and is endorsed by DEFRA and the devolved administrations. PAG is concerned about poor welfare standards, lack of information about a pet's history, offloading sick pets, dealers posing as private sellers, and pets ending up with unsuitable owners who, for example, use them in dog fights. Of course, I'll give way.
What is concerning in the briefing that we've had and discussions that we've had is that it says currently websites are not a safe place to buy a pet, and our estimates, along with other professionals, show that 92% of pets are sold online, with most taking little responsibility in the sale. That's something that we've got to robustly deal with. Would my honourable friend agree with that?
I completely agree with the point that my honourable friend has made, and I know that he has been a staunch campaigner for animal welfare for many years, and I'm sure the Minister is listening to the point that he has made. PAG has set out 27 voluntary minimum standards that advertisers should comply with, and which some of the UK's largest classified websites have agreed to do so. PAG told me that Richard's petition includes one of PAG's minimum standards, that all breeders should include a recognisable photo of young animals, including dogs and cats with their mother, which has been implemented by Pets for Homes and Pre-Loved, who remove adverts when it is not adhered to. PAG will continue to engage with other websites about implementing this more widely. PAG believe its work is vital given the lack of regulation with regard to online advertising and sale of pets. The Dogs Trust asks for PAG's voluntary minimum standards to become a legal requirement for all adverts of pets for sale, and asks for a centralised, publicly accessible list of commercial and private registered sellers and breeders, and believe that a complete ban on advertising pets for sale online would not eradicate the challenges of poor animal welfare, impulsive pet purchases, and unscrupulous sellers seeking to profit from selling animals. And dedicated consumer awareness campaigns will be more likely to encourage responsible advertising and purchasing in the long term. And there is no jurisdiction over websites based outside the UK, so a ban may have the unintended consequence that websites move their operations overseas to avoid having to abide by such a law. The Trust asks that anyone breeding, selling or transferring the ownership of a puppy aged up to 6 months old, regardless of any financial gain, should be required to be registered. Anyone doing so for more than 1 litter of puppies should require a licence, and all breeders should display their unique registration or licence number on any advert. And ask for a central, publicly accessible list of all registered and licensed breeders. Failing this, there should be a single point of entry for the databases operated by individual local authorities, which would allow purchasers to verify where they are buying a dog from, for example, by verifying the postcode. And ask for a single database or a single point of contact for the 15 national microchip databases, and that DEFRA should create a system whereby websites can verify the details on a microchip. And ask that action should be taken against sellers who get around platforms such as Facebook and Instagram, who prohibit sale of pets by using emojis in place of words like for sale, not including the sale price, and speaking with potential buyers in closed groups or private messages, which are unmonitored. The RSPCA told me that demand for puppies rose exponentially during the pandemic as people wanted companionship or exercise during lockdown. During the first lockdown, Google searches for puppies near me increased by 650%, with 15,000 searches in July 2020 compared with 2,000 in January 2020. And the prices for some popular breeds escalated. For example, French bulldogs increased from £1,500 pre-pandemic to £7,000. Unbelievable. Also, English breeders couldn't satisfy the demand, so trade in imported dogs escalated by 43% between May 2019 and May 2020, with many being sold online. The RSPCA believe that although the regulatory framework has changed considerably in the past 5 years, there are still loopholes in the law, and most significantly, huge issues with enforcement of the law, which is especially the case in the complicated online marketplace, and enforcement should be a priority. It is still too easy to find online adverts for pets that are not complying with the 2018 regulations. And as lockdown has shown, sellers and buyers are ignoring the rules around conducting sales in person. It is not clear that online adverts that break the rules are routinely being removed by websites and social media platforms, and the sellers behind them are not being punished. The RSPCA asked for more resources for local authorities who lack the resources and expertise, and more funding for HMRC tax investigations into serious pet selling, which often involves large amounts of money. And the border force should prioritise illegal import of animals. The Kennel Club told me that when the licence regulations changed in 2018 from 5 to 3 puppy litters a year, reputable breeders complained of too much bureaucracy, which resulted in a 10% decrease in puppies being registered with the Kennel Club. They have evidence of disreputable sellers using fake names and false Airbnb addresses to sell puppies from, and that disreputable sellers want to offload puppies quickly, so they sell the popular breeds. The British Veterinary Association is a member of PARG, and it fully supports PARG's position with regard to online animal sales. The placement and content of online advertising is regulated by the Advertising Standards Authority, and it does this by enforcing the Code of Non-Broadcast Advertising, Sales Promotion and Direct Marketing, known as the CAP Code, which is a self-regulatory system, and states that all online adverts are expected to be legal, decent, honest and truthful. Online advertising includes marketing communications on companies' own websites and other third-party space under their control, such as Twitter and Facebook. And the Advertising Standards Authority website states that to report a dubious advert after the fact, you need a photo, a screenshot of the advert, and you need to complete an online form. But it states that it's impossible to check all online adverts because there are millions every year. The Advertising Standards Authority can refer advertisers who persistently break the CAP code to trade-in standards departments in local authorities for enforcement under the 2008 Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations. But this only applies to businesses. And as I've said already, local authority trade-in standards departments are understaffed, under-resourced, and their priority during the pandemic is enforcing COVID restrictions, or as I call them, COVID protections. So I'll conclude by urging the Minister to support Reggie's law to prevent dog fishing, which is a person who tries to mislead someone into buying a dog which may not be what it is advertised as being, for example, a different gender or breed, and in the tragic case of Reggie, a dog that was seriously unwell. And I ask the Minister to answer the requests from the animal organisations that I've presented on their behalf. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered E-petition 587654 relating to regulation of online animal sales. Now, if everyone sticks to about 5 minutes, we'll get everyone in who wants to speak. Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mundell. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate. And can I start by saying how good it is to see Rick sitting at the back there. I hope your feet have recovered. I hope his feet have recovered because he has done so much to highlight this cause. And I remember back in April joining him on a Zoom call late one evening during lockdown, hearing about the story, the terribly sad story that the Honourable Member has outlined, and seeing some of the pictures of Reggie, and any animal lover would not fail to be impacted by the story that Rick has told. I'm really pleased to be able to contribute to this debate today because as a dog owner, two times dog owner, I think there is something very special about animals, particularly dogs. They give you that companionship, they give you that loyalty. And when they're ill, you want to do everything you can to try and protect and look after them and make them better. And particularly when it's a puppy, it is such an emotive issue that not being able to do anything is heartbreaking. So to be able to highlight this issue and to be able to talk about unregulated advertising is something that I think we really do need to consider in this House. And I want to praise and thank the team at Justice for Reggie for the work that they've done in bringing national attention to the issue of puppy farming. I've seen Rick on the TV, I think, more than I've seen the Prime Minister over the last couple of days, appearing on Sky News and a variety of other channels to talk about, with the dog at his side, to talk about these issues, to really capture the nation's attention and highlight the issue of puppy farming and dodgy advertising. And that's what it is, it's dodgy advertising. It is an emotive issue, and it's an issue for families up and down the UK. In Warrington, in my constituency, in Warrington South, I've heard from families who've been personally affected when they've purchased a dog and within a couple of weeks that dog has become desperately ill and they don't know what to do and they don't know where to go to. And they've tried all the normal routes of getting... I certainly will, yeah.
I'm extremely grateful to him for giving me. Really commend the work of the RSPCA actually and the Animal Welfare Foundation, who have come up with a puppy contract, and that could empower someone who's looking to purchase a puppy or a dog from some of the pitfalls that come from irresponsible breeders.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for his comments. I'm going to come on and talk about some of the other charities and animal campaigning groups that have done, I think, so much to highlight this as well. And I think I remember saying to Rick early on that actually, if we can build a coalition on this, That is a great opportunity to really put a strong message out to parliamentarians and to the wider public that this sort of thing is happening. I also think it's worth saying at the start that the government has actually done some really very good work in this area in particular, particularly through Lucy's Law, which now means that anyone wanting to get a new puppy or kitten must buy direct from a breeder, with some significant fines and sentences for people that break the rules. But I think, as the Honourable Member mentioned a little bit earlier, we can go further, and we should go further on some of the legislation. And whilst progress on Lucy's Law has been encouraging, there are difficulties with the application of that legislation, primarily in stopping the importation of illegally farmed puppies from outside the UK. And as we heard from Reggie's perspective, it sounds as though Reggie was imported in from Ireland into this country. The ease and popularity of the internet means that impulse buying of pets has become an appealing option, with people able to just search and find an animal for sale at the click of a button. And the lure of a quick, unregulated sale is also attracting many unscrupulous breeders and dealers to websites and other platforms. And as I mentioned earlier, people in my Warrington South constituency have told me that they've lost money after responding to posts advertising dogs and puppies and cats and kittens on social media and online marketplaces and other pet-selling platforms. When they meet somebody in a car park, hand over cash, and then they disappear, they put it down as a deposit, they never see that person again. And we've got to take steps to stop this happening. In many cases, animal lovers are being encouraged to hand over, as I said, funds as a deposit, and presented with pictures of cute pictures of animals, only for nothing to be delivered in time. And thousands of times a day, we see online selling sites advertising and selling puppies without the parents being present in any photos. This is a general theme we're seeing in online sales, not just here, but right across Europe. And I read an article this morning in the Metro that I think pretty much put it well. People are profiting from misery, and the whole practice of online pet selling is, I'm afraid, a very shady place. Dog thefts, also a consequence of rapidly rising prices, and the pandemic has only sought to increase the opportunity for criminals to exploit pet owners and families. And according to the Pet Food Manufacturers Association, as of March this year, an estimated 3.2 million households had acquired a new pet during lockdown. Now, that is a huge market for criminals right across Europe, and we've got to get tougher in catching them and regulating this online space. I think I've seen some estimates that suggest as many as 88% of the puppies born in Great Britain are bred currently by unlicensed breeders. So we need websites to commit to following at least the minimum of the PAAG standards. And it's important that all adverts display the age of the animal advertised. And while social media sites' rules are very clear that such sales are completely prohibited, there are ways that people get around them. The reality is sellers of banned or dangerous dogs can often be found lurking within the comments section of images with adorable puppy photos in closed groups. And I welcome the priorities set out for sellers to display their licence numbers on all adverts. There are also problems with ensuring that licences are properly granted and that local authorities have adequate resource to assess the applicants themselves and the location of those licences. Even so, many sellers fail to display this number, making it more difficult for consumers to know who they are buying from. And I'd ask that the Minister looks at what action can be taken to encourage more sellers to display their licence details. As the Honourable Member mentioned, local authorities are currently in charge of that licensing, but it is extremely difficult for them to tackle that illegal trading on such a scale because of the lack of resources that they have to monitor the enormous volume of online sales. Indeed, local authorities are unable to monitor the trade offline too, or to provide qualified individuals to assess welfare needs. Along with a stricter licensing regime, we need professionals who are able to adequately determine whether a licence should or should not be granted. And unfortunately, local authority officials who inspect places where animals are sold are not necessarily trained specifically in detecting animal welfare issues. And that's where we need, as the Honourable Member mentioned earlier, the work of the RSPCA and other organisations to be included too. Another important point is individuals who buy such animals are not aware that the seller should be licenses. So Mr Mundell, to conclude, if I may, I'm looking forward to hearing the Minister with responses to the request for government to introduce further regulation for all websites where animals are sold, including private individuals. And can I again congratulate all at Justice for Reggie campaign for the incredible work that they've done to highlight this campaign.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and it's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would also like to thank the member for Neath for opening today's debate on E-petition 587654 and the over 100,000 signatories who have brought this important issue to discussion. As an animal lover, I fully support any measures that will strengthen animal welfare laws, and I commend Richard Ackers for his dedication in pursuing Reggie's Law, and I am saddened by the circumstances that led him here in the first place. Traumatic for Richard and his family, of course, but also devastatingly cruel for Reggie, the adorable 12-week-old puppy whose death sits at the very heart of this campaign. Many people across the UK have found themselves with a surplus of free time over the past 20 months or so. We are a nation of animal lovers, and millions found themselves in a position to take on a pet they might not have otherwise had time for. We saw adoption rates soar. We also saw a huge increase in puppy sales, and naturally it became a seller's market. It hasn't just been puppies like Reggie, though. There has been an increase in ownership of other pets too, like cats and rabbits. Unfortunately, there will always be people looking to take advantage of that increase in demand. It's always been an issue. Some unscrupulous sellers putting profit before the well-being of the animals. I'd like to think they are in the minority, but that doesn't detract from the need to do everything we can to prevent them. There are existing licensing laws that go some way in providing regulatory oversight, but it has become clear that they're no longer enough. Sales made through online platforms by unlicensed private sellers are prevalent. It's not an issue isolated to pets either. I've spoken before about the need for better regulation of online marketplaces for children's toys. When it comes to the sale of live and sentient beings, often suffering, it cannot continue to fly under the radar unaddressed. The Pet Advertising Advisory Group have done some excellent work on this issue, developing 27 minimum standards that should be adhered to by online adverts for young animals. Their collaborative approach is some of the UK's biggest online platforms on board. The standards remain voluntary, though, and this means that not all websites have opted to implement them. I know that DEFRA supports and encourages take-up of these standards, but will the Minister commit to legislating for them? I also want to highlight the issue of cat breeding, which is sometimes overshadowed by the focus on puppy farms and smuggling. This year's Cat Protection's Cats report found a huge increase in online sales for cats, with 68% of new owners purchasing their cat online. As I touched on before, this has led to skyrocketing cat prices, with the average price almost £150 higher than in 2020. I am very pleased to be able to say that cat breeding is regulated in Scotland, but disappointed in equal measure that Scotland is the only part of the UK that does. As of September this year, anyone breeding 3 or more litters in a year must be licensed. The PAAG agrees that cat breeding should be regulated, although most members believe the threshold should be 2 or more litters annually. The PAAG also generally supports registration of breeders for 1 litter, although the Cats Protection have concerns this could have unintended consequences, such as an increase in abandoned kittens for those who find themselves with an unexpected litter. Kittens do not fetch as high a price as puppies, so I understand the concern. Scotland is also the only nation in the UK that regulates rabbit breeding. That threshold is a little higher, 6 or more litters of kits a year, presumably recognising there's a reason for the phrase breeding like rabbits. Could the Minister tell us her department's plans to regulate the sales of cats, rabbits and other common pets? Have the department engaged with their Scottish counterparts to inform those plans? To conclude, Mr Mundell, the Government's initial response to the petition does indicate positive forward movement. The position that advertising standards and trading standards sit within the remit of the relevant non-ministerial bodies is disappointing, though. These bodies must have the legislative framework to work within first, and that responsibility sits with ministers. Thank you.
Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. Bonnie came to us when she was about 7 years old. She was dumped in a field with 3 other dogs in the West Midlands. She was emaciated, she was traumatised, and she'd quite obviously been used for puppy breeding. Her body was covered in scars, and her feet were rotten from the urine that she'd been paddling in the cage or the shed that she'd been born in. That's the background to the dear little puppies that are sold online. That's where they come from. It's misery. They're then laundered fraudulently through breeding bitches, presented as the mother of the litter. And it doesn't matter much whether they come from Wales, whether they come from England, whether they come, as many do, from Northern Ireland, or the Irish Republic, or from mainland Europe. A lot of them are in the country illegally. Many are carrying diseases. These doggies for life, not just for Christmas dogs, puppies, are bought before Christmas very often. And within 2 or 3 days, people like my eldest son, who is a vet in practice, is asked to pick up the bits of a dying puppy while a little girl is in tears, having been given the animal for Christmas. That's what we're dealing with. So what are we going to do about it? Personally, I'd like to ban the sale of all sentient beings online. But I have to accept that that horse has probably left the stable long ago. We're now living in an age of electronic sales. So it's got to be right that each and every person, whether they're selling as breeders, whether they're selling commercially, whether they're selling, quotes, privately, are licensed and identifiable. Of course.
That there should be some responsibility with the online platforms for looking at what's going on in that space. I remember as having worked in broadcast space that selling pets on air was prohibited. I think in newspapers there were certain regulations. It seems to me that the online space is a wild west where there really isn't any regulation by those platform owners.
My old friend's absolutely right. The online platforms, as we know, are notoriously reluctant to take responsibility for, well, anything much, if they can get away with it. I believe that the online platforms should have a responsibility for checking the licenses of the people who are selling. Actually, not just this, but a lot of other products as well, before they're allowed to do so. So I commend Rick Ackers for promoting Reggie's Law and the thousands of people that have signed the petition. But Rick's sore feet won't be going anywhere unless we get some legislation. And I hope very much, and I think we owe it to a lot of people, to make sure that we get this properly under control once and for all. Thank you.
Your chairship and speak in this debate today, and especially to follow the honourable member, who I know is a lifelong passionate animal welfare campaigner just like myself. And as honourable members across the House well know, we are a proud nation of animal lovers. Animal welfare is an issue that cuts across political divides, And I'm so pleased to see members across the House today calling for urgent reform and regulation of the sale of animals online. All of us who have pets know firsthand the joy and excitement of bringing home a new cat or dog or rabbit to become a member of the family. And I'm becoming something of a broken record now, but bringing home my own Jack Russell puppies, Dottie and Dora, 9 years ago really was an incredibly exciting time for my family. Dottie and Dora came from a friend up the road whose dog had just had puppies. I was lucky. I knew they had been looked after and they had stayed with their mum until they were big enough to leave safely. But in the 9 years since then, there has been a huge shift in the way people acquire animals, as we have already heard. The most popular way people get a new pet is online. 92% of all pet sales are now done online, via websites that allow for third-party sales or on social media. And while I know that the vast majority of people looking to get a pet this way are doing their best to make sure it's been properly looked after and is the right age to leave its mother, there are many, many tragic cases where animals are being bred or transported to the UK in horrible circumstances and then sold on to unsuspecting customers online. And in the worst instances, like Reggie, these animals are simply too sick to survive, leaving behind devastated families. Just last week, I was honoured to join the team behind Reggie's Law campaign at 10 Downing Street to hand their petition, which received more than 100,000 signatures to the Prime Minister. They have turned their tragedy into a really powerful campaign, and it is wonderful to see Richard here today and the team after they walked an incredible 232 miles from his home in London to raise awareness of this important issue and to raise money to support animal charities. Hope Rescue is one of the beneficiaries of this fundraising. They are a dog rescue charity working across South Wales and who they operate from a rescue centre in Llanharan, based just across the border in my good friend, the Honourable Member for Ogmore's constituency. Just a few months ago, I was able to visit them and see firsthand the incredible work they do in looking after rescued and abandoned dogs. One of the puppies I saw there was just 5 weeks old and had been rescued from an illegal puppy farm only a few days earlier. But he was one of the lucky ones. He is now in a place where he is loved and cared for and luckily has suffered no long-term damage as a result of his start in life. As members across the House well know, there is already a significant amount of regulation in place across the UK to help control the sales of pets online. And we have heard back from my honourable friend that in England and Wales, these are set out in the respective licensing of activities involving animals regulations. Now, although these regulations have evolved, their provisions on pet sales are broadly the same. These requirements involve all advertisements, online and offline, for pet displays and licence numbers and issuing local authorities, as well as recognisable photos and the age of the animal. For dogs specifically, the regulations also require that the completion of the sale be done in person, not online, at the site where the dog was kept, and in the case of puppies, that the animal is seen with his or her mother. Lucy's Law also bans the third-party sales of puppies and kittens, as we've already heard, both in England and Wales, meaning that these animals should only ever be sold by the person who bred them, and in Wales, from the breeder's premises. But it's clear from Reggie's tragic story, and as other honourable members today have said, these regulations simply aren't working well enough. A quick online search shows that one of the major issues with the current regulations is that they simply aren't being enforced properly. And this has only been exacerbated by the explosion of interest in buying a pet during lockdown, as we have already heard. Local authorities have seen their funding slashed over the last decade, and over the last 18 months have faced enormous challenges because of the pandemic. And while I recognise that policing and enforcement is not a key responsibility of the Minister's Department, I am hugely concerned that not enough is being done to tackle this all-important issue. And whilst I commend the government's Pet Fished campaign and recognise that public awareness of the things to look out for is vital, until the bad actors are actually stopped from making huge amounts of money selling animals illegally online, then there will be more sad stories like Reggie's. I support calls in this petition to require people who are selling animals online to verify their identity, and I would be grateful if the Minister could outline the government's policy on this matter. I also urge her to work with her counterparts across government and the devolved governments to make enforcing policies on animal welfare both at home and at the border a priority. Without swift action, there will sadly be many more Reggies and many more Ricks and families like his forced to contend with losing a beloved animal pet, family pet in horrible circumstances like these. Thank you, Mr Mundell.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. Unusually, I don't think I can disagree with a single thing that has been said in the chamber today. And as I look around the chamber at the other colleagues that are going to contribute, I don't think I'm going to disagree with anything they say. So don't test me too much. And it was a pleasure to be with Ricky outside number 10 with several colleagues in the pouring rain. The longer we stayed there, the more it rained, and it was horrendous. And to get 100,000 signatures from one person's experience means that actually touched a nation. And the reason it touched a nation, as we've already heard, Ms. Rundell, is because we are a country, a United Kingdom of animal lovers. And I've seen more people get agitated about hurting an animal than very often people hurting themselves or other people. And in many ways that's right, because these animals can't defend themselves. And as my honourable friend said, the industry which is out there is the most abhorrent industry in puppy farms. When I was a young lad, a very young lad, I used to work in Petticoat Lane, Brick Lane in North London, where puppies were sold at the side of the road in cages. They'd obviously come from puppy farms way back then, 50 odd years ago, and we banned that. We stopped that. But those marketplaces of Petticoat Lane and other markets around the country, and all of my colleagues' constituencies, which were there, are now online. And it is fundamentally unacceptable for platforms or marketplaces or whatever they want to call themselves today to say, hold up, it's too difficult to monitor this, like it's too difficult for them to pay some tax occasionally. They spend an untold amount of money making sure they get around that sort of regulation. And it's about time we put regulations, not after the fact, actually as it's happening today. And I do commend the government and the minister for the work that was done around Lucy's Law. That was life-changing for a lot of people. But what is also life-changing for a lot of people is when they, in good faith, they see a puppy online and its gorgeous little eyes, and mummy sitting there looking after it, snuggling up, having its milk. And that is not the puppy they're going to get, and it wasn't their mother that was giving milk to that puppy. And I have constituents that say to me they went to collect their puppy that they bought online with their children, and there is the little puppy in a car park because the family something's going on in the house, of course. Or they showed you mum but mum is nowhere near the dog or the puppies. And actually, within months, not only is the puppy ill, sometimes in days, but it's not actually what they bought in the first place. I've got a constituent, I bought a whippet. It's the biggest whippet you've ever seen now. And it has clearly been crossbred with other animals. And they're petrified of going back, even if they know who the seller might be, because these people are serious criminals. Let's not beat around the bush about this. They are criminals. I'll give way, by all means.
If this law was passed, it would be an exemplar for other countries across the world. It would send the message out. So it would be an exemplar for other countries. But you also agree with me, it's a win-win situation. It's a win-win for the consumer, the person buying the dog, and more importantly, it's a win for the dogs and the animals themselves.
I completely agree with the Honourable Chairman. It's a win for everybody. It's a win with the Inland Revenue if we get this right, because none of these people are paying any tax. It's a complete win for the animal and looking after not just that puppy, but where that puppy came from. That puppy farm, where I remember a lady said she had a lovely Jack Russell. I saw some footage of a bitch that came in on heat, and they put her in a shed with 3 or 4 other male stud dogs to make sure that she had puppies within a few weeks. That animal nearly never survived, let alone giving birth. These things are happening. So these people are criminals. So while we're saying, quite rightly, we need to give more powers to local authorities, we need to give them the expertise, and we need to give them the ammunition that actually scares the criminals out of this marketplace. And at the same time, the people that are providing that marketplace need to close it down. In this world we live in today, they are going to be bought online. The pandemic increased the amount of people online. I went through trauma at home, absolute trauma, because we lost our puppy. It's the first time in my life that we haven't got a dog at home. She was 22. She was a dachshund, before dachshunds were fashionable like they are at the moment. and we've lost her. And at home, both my daughters and my wife are saying, Mike, we get a puppy, we're at home, we can look after her now, da, 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 da. And I stood my ground for one simple reason: we're not at home now. And if you go to any of the rescue centres now, there are thousands of animals in rescue centres now for people that are in the right frame of mind at the time, and lockdown put a lot of us into very difficult times. At the time, it was the right thing, and it's not. But if you go to that rescue centre, you won't be able to just pick it up and walk away. They will check you out and make sure that the animal is healthy. And that is what we should be doing today. So I say to the Minister, it may be difficult, but lots of things are difficult in government, and that's why we're in government, to sort these things out and to sort the online markets out. And it can be done if there's a will, and there's a will in this room today. Thank you.
Neil Hanvey.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship and speak on this important debate. I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Neath for bringing forward this debate, but most importantly, I want to thank Richard Akers, or Rick as he's better known, and the Reggie's Law team for their courage, their passion, compassion and determination to bring this matter into focus and before the House today through their petition, tireless campaigning and an over 200-mile walk from Wigan to deliver the petition, which was an honour to join Rick as he did so to number 10 last week. But there can be surely no more a noble pursuit than seeking to protect those who are otherwise defenceless against tyranny. That is what we are concerned with today, the tyrannical abuse of power against defenceless creatures, and what action we can take to limit, prevent and ultimately stamp out such cruel practices. Like many families, mine was blessed with a new puppy during the pandemic, and reflecting back, our wee puppy could so easily have suffered the same fate as Rick's Reggie. We found his advert online, we visited the seller, and despite asking all of the reasonable questions about the location of the mother, once we'd seen the pup, we melted, and we just accepted the assurances that we were given that Mum was resting because she was tired from suckling. Thankfully, our wee Malou is fine and is now the boss of all he surveys. But Rick's family were not so fortunate. And since the loss of Reggie in December of 2020, Rick and the Justice for Reggie team have been working with other distressed families to highlight, uncover the facts about the illegal puppy trade, illegal online sales, and the mental health impact that that has on families. Their work aims to use this tragedy to deliver positive legislation by gaining the support of Parliament, and it's great to see cross-party support today. And what will Reggie's Law do? Well, it will incorporate regulations to provide a safe buying platform for potential buyers and animals sold online and animal selling sites. It's far too easy to sell a pet. It only requires an email address and a burner phone. Rick has found too many online pet selling sites are reluctant to even engage in improving the standards of online animal sales and welfare. It would require all online pet selling platforms to support a comprehensive ID check of the seller behind every pet and require evidence of the mum to be submitted, whether by photo ID or other means. And I would suggest today that that should be tied to pet passports, because the identifier that exists with them, because we know a large number of puppies are illegally imported into the UK to be sold online. And the other question really to understand is, will this law make a difference? Well, Rick and the team are in regular discussion with various stakeholders from the RSPCA, the Dogs Trust and others, and they have secured agreement that ID requirements of Reggie's Law would not only put in place necessary barriers for this practice, but it would also make investigations and court actions against illegal breeders and sellers much easier. We know that from the international response in Victoria and Australia, following the introduction of a similar law known as Oscar's Law, dog theft, illegal breeding and selling dropped by over 90%. A Reggie's Law could have such a positive impact, not only on the puppy farm pets and stolen pets, but also to the health and well-being of owners and buyers. As animal lovers and as pet owners, we know the bond of love and loyalty that exists within the family pet. will the Minister outline how this matter is to be taken forward, given the wide public support and cross-party support here today? We have a duty to honour such loyalty by protecting those creatures who are otherwise defenceless against such cruelty. And it would give a real opportunity to set the tone for legislation to be developed across these islands. Thank you, Mr Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. It's a pleasure to speak on this. And first of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for Neath for setting the scene so very well for us all to follow. I'd also like to congratulate the Richard in the gallery today for his contribution to make this happen, and all those MPs who, in very wet day, made the effort. I wasn't one of them, by the way, but those who made an effort to be there on that day, and it's a pleasure to do that. When I read the title for this debate, I knew that this was one on which I wanted to sow into the debate and add my comments. I've always been an animal lover. I've always been fortunate in my life, Mr Chairman, to have had dogs since my mother and father, when we lived in the countryside or in small villages, so therefore having a dog was as natural as getting up in the morning, going for a walk and going to school. So we've always had dogs, and I remember my first dog very well in Ballywalter back in the 60s, in the early 60s. It was a collie dog. We've had Pomeranians, Jack Russells, Terriers. We've had Springers, Cocker Spaniels. We've also moved to the hunting dogs. I love hunting, and my dogs have a purpose, which the early dogs give you a purpose of love and affection and companionship. The dogs today give you are hunting dogs, and for that reason, I was also very fortunate that I married some 34 years ago another animal lover who volunteered in the Susi for 10 years. She now works part-time in a cattery. But Sandra had a love of cats, and I had the love of dogs, and I learned to love cats because that's the way my wife wanted me to. So it was just the way it happened. And now I love the cats as much as my wife did, although I had to acquire that affection for them over the years. What brought us together was our love for each other. But from a Cece, she then brought home a wonderful rescue dog called Autumn, and that's the dog we have now. That dog was abused. It was obviously very fearful. The dog had a fear, particularly of men. You only had to even raise your voice a bit, and the dog's tail was between its legs. And it took a number of years for that dog to come round. She was obviously some 7 years down the line, and she's loving her life, and Sandra and myself couldn't imagine life without her. So she and so many others like her are the reason that I abhor online shopping for animals, due to the lack of regulation and the potential for abuse of the system which is in place to protect animal welfare concerns. That's why this debate is so important. That's why the contributions made by the members are so pertinent to this debate, and I very much look forward to the Minister's response. I've spoken on many occasions against puppy farms and the need to see the dog that you're getting into the home with the mum and not in the Tesco car park, as the honourable gentleman referred to, whether it be Tesco or whatever car park. It just happens that sometimes where it happens is it's a bigger car park and you get lost in the crowd. The reason is to prevent some of the horror stories that we hear daily of the maltreatment of animals in puppy farms. I know that COVID-19 exacerbated the online sales of animals, there's no doubt about that. People were seeking companionship and they needed someone to fill that gap. But many of the charities such as Blue Cross and Dogs Trust have sent me briefings and sent others briefings that indicate the view and understanding that the internet is a way that many pets are bought and sold in the 21st century. And therefore we must work together with classified websites, with the social media platforms and other charities and the government and the Minister to ensure the online marketplace is as safe as possible for people to buy and sell animals. So it's how do we improve that? And I very much look to my Minister and to my government for how that will happen. My preference would be to end all online sales, but I do understand that this is the way that the world is now operating, and therefore it may not be possible to do that. So what we do then, I would suggest, is bring in regulation that can change it. And the understanding comes the need to ensure that enforceable legislation is in place. Blue Cross has stated Mr Chairman, that they would urge the Government to legislate to make the Pet Advertising Advisory Group's minimum standards a legal requirement for websites selling animals, and further the Government, I believe, must look, and the Minister, at the legislation introduced in France in 2016. It's a good example, I think, of how we can do it, and if they can do it there, I'm not fond of everything that comes out of Europe, it's not a secret, but if France can do something with this legislation, then why can't we at least look at that and see how we can do it? And that mandated the inclusion of tax numbers in all online pet adverts to ascertain if something similar would be workable across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I suggest that's one thing we can do. As someone who is usually sceptical of additional regulation, it is not often that I advocate for it, but at bare minimum, we must introduce these minimum standards. But I do not believe that this is the end of the obligations. And I would ask the Minister again, Mr Chairman, through yourself, if consideration has been given to appointing a working group to tease out the best way of fulfilling our animal welfare obligations to a high standard where we all want to be, and the Minister wants to be, and not the bare minimum standard that some see. And which is apparent today. How can we allow reputable businesses to continue their trade? There are some who do it absolutely right, and not everybody's in the puppy farm business. There are those who do it the right way, and we've got to make sure that those who do it right are rewarded and can continue to do so. That we allow the reputable business to continue their trade whilst ferreting out those who take no care or concern for the animal they are selling or the home they are placing that animal into. I believe in this House, this debate today, Mr Chairman, has given us a chance to reiterate and say again our commitment which we've had in the past and have again. I must do better than we are currently doing. And I asked the Minister in this last point. I know the Minister, like myself, is very keen to see something in place that works. The Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland and the rest of the regions of the United Kingdom, how is it working to ensure that what's happening in the Republic of Ireland, if there's puppy farms there, they can't come through Northern Ireland and into Scotland and onto the mainland? I think those are some of the questions I'd like to ask. Mr Chairman, thanks for your patience.
Thank you very much, and I call Lisa Cameron to sum up on behalf of the SNP.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, Mr Mundell. And it is a pleasure to take part in this debate and to sum up for the Scottish National Party. I'd really like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Neath, who set the scene in such a detailed way at the start, who often speaks on animal welfare matters, and I think she laid out the crux of the matter for the Minister today, and also set the scene in terms of the care of the public and why this is just such an important debate to so many right across the United Kingdom. And of course, I must also pay a very special tribute to Richard Ackers, who is here today and who spearheaded this campaign, a wonderful campaign which really has paid tribute in such an important and compassionate way to the life of Reggie, to make sure that his sad life and death were not in vain, because so much good can actually come from his story and from just how this little puppy, Reggie, has stolen the hearts of so many people right across the United Kingdom and is now spearheading a campaign to ensure that no other puppies and other pets go through the same similar trauma that he did. I'd like to pay tribute to many of the honourable members who have spoken today. It has been a fantastic debate from all sides of the House, and as has already been mentioned, it's been very difficult to disagree with anything that has been said so far, which is somewhat unusual but very something that makes me feel extremely positive, and as the honourable member for Strangford says, is extremely refreshing too in this House. The honourable member for Rutherglen and Hamilton spoke about cats and rabbits too, and I think that's important. I tend to, as chair of the all-party dog welfare group, have a focus on dogs, which I think until he met his wife, the honourable member for Strangford, had too. But it's very important that we realise that there's a huge sale of other types of pets too, and that this type of regulation can have such a wide-ranging impact. Many honourable members have spoken. The honourable member for Hemel Hempstead, the honourable member for Warrington South, the honourable member for North Thanet, the honourable member for Pontypridd, who I joined last week at number 10 with Rick at the doors of number 10. Yes, yes. And absolutely. And I thought I had everybody's names down here, but I do pay tribute to the honourable member who is waving at me from across the way in whose constituency. Hemel Hempstead. I did mention, I've written it down here, who has really, I think, managed to combine so many animal welfare campaigns that it's been quite amazing to work with him on those, and again was one of the leading lights in the campaign last week. And obviously the honourable member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath too, who was there on the steps alongside us in such a cross-party effort, and made sure that we were aware too that this didn't just affect little Reggie, but it also is running to this day, and that MPs too can fall foul when they're buying puppies and animals online, despite best efforts and despite all of the research that we try to do, because as he mentioned, as soon as you see that little animal, that little puppy, and particularly if you have your family with you, then your heart melts and the sale is done. And therefore, the unscrupulous dealers of puppies and kittens and other pets see it as money in the bank. We thought we had done a lot with Lucy's Law, and we have, and I want to pay tribute to Mark Abraham today because it has taken us on a journey along the way towards much better regulation. But I think, as has been mentioned today, we have further steps to take, and that laws must be strengthened. In the Justice for Reggie campaign, the group have listened to thousands of people every month who suffer from scams, heartache and financial turmoil, and most end up paying financially as well as emotionally. They're traumatised and scarred, and all the time the seller gets to re-advertise on platforms because, quite simply, they lack the regulation that needs to occur. Rick said, when I bought Reggie through a well-known selling website, I realised I'd unknowingly contributed to illegal puppy farming. I have never hidden the fact that I could have done more research and should have walked away. This would have prevented the seller getting more money to continue the illegal acts of animal cruelty engaged in, although Reggie's fate would have been the same and he would still have died. What I gave Reggie was love and dignity and ensured he had pain relief throughout his very short life. Had I not bought him, Reggie would have been discarded like rubbish and died in pain. Families are quite simply placed into an impossible situation day after day. And Rick's campaign have heard from over 300 families who have contacted them distraught, not knowing which way to turn, blaming themselves, as they also bought puppies using online sites. I will indeed.
Hopefully I'm not shortening the time from the Minister, Mr Mundell. But there's another side to this as well. There are people out there that want to buy dogs in particular that are mutilated. Their ears have been cut, not by vets, not by anybody, and they mutilate these animals and then they sell them on. Now, there was a market for that, and that market needs to be shut and the full force of the law done. So it's just not families that are buying something that they can love and cherish. There are people that want to buy a mutilated dog, and they're available on these sites.
Absolutely, the honourable member makes an extremely good point, and there's also what I would describe as an ongoing fashion in dogs, which are bred in particular ways that are not particularly healthy for the dog breed itself, and I think that also has to be looked at alongside the matter that he has raised. Since the introduction of Lucy's Law, which we all applauded, and I was absolutely privileged and delighted to campaign on and launch in Parliament as chair of APDOG, we applauded this law, and it has gone a long way, but as we can see, people are evading it. And also, Rick's campaign itself has spoken now over the lockdown to 86 councils across the UK, and all of them have repeated the same. We are underfunded and understaffed to police this. So much more support must go to councils, and I think that's going to be absolutely crucial, and it would be helpful if the Minister could indicate as to the level of ongoing collaboration with the council groups and as to how we can strengthen this to make sure that in practice it does what it says it does on the tin. It's very, very upsetting for families to go through this. Rick himself said it affected his mental health, and he was so disturbed by it that he decided to set up the Animal Welfare Alliance, a collaboration of 10 of the largest websites in the UK, prompted by Justice for Reggie through the numerous meetings. And the aim is to share the data and to improve the protection. However, they're not naive enough to say this will solve the problems. They need government to act. This clearly needs enforcing with regulations, and as many honourable members have said, it's just a wild west on this internet now. Quite frankly, without government acting to ensure regulation, this will not happen because platforms simply will not do it themselves. Rick has highlighted PAG and appreciates the work that they do to control online sales to try to make it a safer place, but quite frankly, they can't do it alone and only speak with a small number of websites. We know, as we've discussed, that we're in a digital age, so we can't turn the clock back. A ban on online sales, it's not pragmatic, it's not doable, it's not going to work. So regulation is supported by many of the animal welfare charities that have contacted myself prior to this debate, and seems to be the most pragmatic way of addressing these very grave matters. I wanted just to finish by saying that, you know, pets are sentient. There seems to me to be more regulation if you're to buy a car online nowadays than there is if you're to buy a pet. You have to go through many more processes to make sure and verify who you are and verify your insurance and all of the various things. But buying a pet doesn't seem to even have the same level of rigour that it really should have in this day. So the Minister has a tall order, but I know this Minister has a good heart, and I know this Minister tries her very best on everything that she works on. It's in a tribute to Reggie, we must make sure his life is not in vain. We must tackle this online Wild West with regulation. It's a mix of consumer scams, as we've heard, it's a mix of animal cruelty, and it's also a mix of serious organised criminals who are profiting in the same way as they do from other illegal activities that they engage in. So it's a very serious matter. Very quickly.
I'm extremely grateful because I was very touched with the comments from the member from Hampstead as well about the criminal nature of these gangs. Unfortunately, in Carmarthenshire, we've got a number of illegal puppy farms. But the fines, when they're caught, seem pretty low. There's been one instance of a £200,000 fine. Do we need to be looking at the penalty for those people who engage in this activity?
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point to end on. There must be action taken, because this is about serious organised criminals. I have the same situation in my constituency, as the honourable member has mentioned, and it's difficult to address these issues. It's concerted effort, but it must be undertaken. It must be undertaken to make sure there are no further little dogs like Reggie who go through such a terrible death. Thank you.
Opposition spokesman Daniel Zagnam.
Mr Mundell, it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And can I start by congratulating my honourable friend for Neath. I thought her introduction was comprehensive, full, and excellent and very moving. And what a fantastic debate. What fantastic unanimity around the chamber. Powerful contributions from Warrington, from Ruther Glen and Hamilton West, from Pontypridd, from North Thanet, from Kirkcaldy and Caldon Beath, from Strangford, from Hemel Hempstead, and some powerful interventions from Bootle as well. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to put on the record the tributes from the Labour side to the fantastic campaign for Reggie's Law, and to offer our support, and to support the 109,000 people who signed the petition. And like others, I was delighted to meet Rick in a rather wet Trafalgar Square last week. What a walk, what a campaign, and what a wounded heel. And there's a simple message, I think, from that campaign, Mr. Mundell, which is the law isn't working, and it's up to us here to do something about it, as was powerfully put by the members from North Thanet and Hemel Hempstead. And I think the biggest question for the Minister is how are DEFRA working with DCMS, because this is actually as much about the online world as it is about animal welfare. I have to say, Mr. Mundell, that during the committee stages of the Kept Animals Bill, Labour did put forward an amendment which we believe would have gone a long way to securing progress on this. I will return to it later. Obviously, the concerns around online advertising have been around for a long time. I'm not going to repeat the points made by others, but it is clear that the pandemic introduced a new range of issues, and the world has changed very much, as I think the member for Hemel Hempstead said. We've gone from that old world of notices on village notice boards and all the rest of it to an online world where every notice board is available to everybody everywhere, and that creates a whole new set of problems. And we've heard the figures about the rise in the number of searches and the problems that creates. And also from the work on the Kept Animals Bill, I could see the surge in prices, the problems with imports from abroad. And it's very clear that the treatment of imported cats and dogs, particularly in terms of imports, has fallen below acceptable standards, and we are seeing criminal gangs who can see a lucrative revenue stream. And of course the government has recognised those problems. However, our feeling is that their solutions at the moment don't go far enough. Hence our amendments to try and crack down. And I have to say, there were some members on the government side who agreed with us on that, and it was fairly close on the Kept Animals Bill, and I hope we'll have the opportunity at the report stage to go further with this. And I think the point was made by the member for Pontypridd actually very well about the changes in the world that we've seen over the last few years, and that's led to a whole range of worrying situations, including the click and collect or click and drop situations where animals are collected by potential buyers. And the research from the Kennel Club has suggested that for many people these approaches, these ways of buying animals have become the new norms. We've heard about some of the developments that have been made, the licensing of activities involving animals regulations. We've heard about Lucy's Law, quite rightly. There has been progress, but there is more that needs to be done. And I think the problem that Rick and others made to me was that PAG may well be well-meaning, but it's just not going to work with a voluntary system. And of course, many of the members of PAG come to the same conclusions. So there's a whole list of things that people want done. And alongside that, there are the enforcement questions. And again, the RSPCA make it very clear that there's plenty of evidence that those who break the rules don't really face any real consequences. They tell us that it's not clear that online adverts that break the rules are routinely removed by many sites, and social media sites, nor the sellers responsible for those people to be punished. And frankly, the local authorities, I think we've already heard from a number of members, don't have the resources, probably don't have the expertise to deal with this. But I rather agree with the member for Hemel Hempstead. It is a real will. Frankly, it could be done. And that's the question. Is there a real will? Are we prepared to put the resources into it? Many of these websites and social media platforms, I don't think there's much sympathy for them in this room, quite frankly, are hugely profitable businesses. They're very good at, how can I put it, being creative about how they account for themselves. But this is part of the problem, that often there are external jurisdictions and we need to work with others to try and clamp down on this. This is a bigger, wider problem, Mr. Mundell, but this is when we see the sheer horribleness of it and the consequence of it. So we do need better resourced enforcement. We do need to use some of those tax investigations, and we do need to make sure that we go beyond the voluntary. Just to finish on the details of Reggie's Law, as I mentioned earlier, we did try and introduce some of that through an amendment during the Kept Animals Bill, and I hope it will come again at report stage. It would have required all websites that sell animals to verify the identity of all sellers. It also demanded that all prospective sellers who wish to sell a cat or dog aged 1 year or less must post a photograph of the animal with one of its parents, as a number of members were suggesting. and it would have required for listings by commercial sellers which did not include that seller's licence number to be removed, therefore helping to ensure that all animals sold online come from reputable, trustworthy sources. Now, we did have a discussion in committee, but the government chose not to accept the amendment. In her response to the amendment, the Minister cited, not this Minister I have to say, cited the existing legislation and guidelines that are in place. But frankly, Mr Mundell, that isn't enough. The campaign for Reggie demands more. The petitioners demand more. Frankly, I think all of us in this room demand more. The online world does have a lot to offer, but it must stop being a haven for those who profit from the cruel exploitation of animals. It's time to crack down on them, Mr Mundell.
I'll just be mindful that we leave a couple of minutes at the end for Christina Rees to wind up.
Indeed I will, Mr Mundell, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to firstly start by paying tribute to my honourable friend for Neath, because I thought she laid out brilliantly the challenges we'd got and cantered through the challenge both of online, whilst recognising PAG's work, and at this point I'd like to pay tribute to, you've been called Rick, Richard Ackers, etc., but to you I pay tribute for the work you've done. As you've heard this afternoon, we don't always have one voice in this place to do things, but I think what you've managed to do is galvanise members from all sides of the House to put forward a very compelling case that there is a challenge here, and I hope that you will hear in my response something to give you hope that we recognise that this is not only a challenge, but also that we need help from people such as yourself to actually get this right and get the right answers, because not only does it cause emotional distress, we also then heard from the honourable member, and I'm going to get Kilcaddy and Cowdenbeath, how when you are presented with a small puppy in front of you, actually your heart melts. And as a Labrador owner, my sympathy to you and your family and your children. It's just grim what happened. So, in that vein, we are a nation of animal lovers, and if we wanted a debate to prove that, this afternoon couldn't have done a better job. And we abhor, I think, with one voice, the mistreatment of animals. The government has worked hard to improve the welfare of animals wherever they are, but the debate today has outlined that there are still gaps that need filling. Our record on animal welfare is good, and in recent years we have done more to make sure that we are filling those gaps and that animals receive the care and protection they deserve. Only in June this year, we put forward the Animal Welfare Sentencing Act, and that delivered the manifesto commitment to increase sentences available in our courts for the most serious cases of animal cruelty from 6 months to 5 years. We also have our action plan for animal welfare launched this year, setting out future aims and ambitions, and this plan brings together the wide range of different issues that we are dealing with. Now, in addition, the commitment to maintain the UK at the leading edge of animal welfare is one that we all agree on. The Justice for Reggie campaign, as we've heard, focuses on advertising requirements which reply to the sale of pets. The campaign, as we've heard, stemmed from Reggie's sad little life, and the online sale of pets is currently regulated in the following way. Under the Animal Welfare Licensing of Activities Involving Animals Regulation, anyone in the business of selling animals as pets or breeding or selling dogs requires a valid licence. Now, we have heard that this is a challenge, quite frankly, and that We know that we've strengthened things up, that dog breeders are expected to obtain a licence if they breed and sell 3 or more litters a year. It prohibits the sale of puppies and kittens, ferrets or rabbits, and we do talk to Scotland quite regularly on that basis to ensure that we can learn from what they are doing. Making sure that they're not sold under the age of 8 weeks, to prevent licensed breeders from selling those dogs not bred by them, preventing breeders from breeding dogs that it can be reasonably expected on the basis of their genotype or phenotype or health would lead to welfare problems, which was slightly the issue that the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead raised. And licensed breeders must show puppies to purchasers in the presence of their mum. However, we heard that when presented with the puppy, that isn't always the easiest thing to insist on, particularly if you have those around you wanting to take it home. Licensed sellers advertising puppies for sale must include their number, and the Minister and I have spoken on the recent penalty notices bill about how that will add another tool to our toolbox. We've heard of Lucy's law about how that stops the early separation of animals from their mums, unnecessary journeys at a young age from breeder to pet shop, and the keeping of puppies in inappropriate commercial premises. But we've also heard that for all that, these things still go on. So we know that under this, under these licensing requirements, the licensees must meet a strict statutory welfare, and anybody who advertises must include their number on the advert and must specify which local authority issued the licence. And at this stage, I would say there is an onus on us, and Rick has said at every point he should have done more. But I am cogent to the fact that that is, whilst easy to say, quite challenging to do. The advert... Oh, yes, of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that social media companies can play a much bigger part in this? It's not beyond the wit of man to create a form for that type of information, those licence numbers, to be entered in so that they could be very clearly verified using technology today. Is it something that she could perhaps look at with colleagues in DCMS?
Indeed. I think he brings up a point about responsibility. Whilst there's responsibility on those that purchase, responsibility on the breeders, there must also be responsibility across the piece on online companies as well. Making sure that things can be done easily, and it goes to the Honourable, I think it was the Honourable Member for Neath mentioned about databases, making sure those are functional is also quite important in this space, and something that I think that I think Mr. Acker has also brought up in his work, of course.
One of the biggest issues for her as a minister, and probably us to understand, the public to understand, if these animals were pigs or cattle, we know exactly who the mum was, we know exactly where they've been travelling, all the breeding, everything, we know everything about them for our safety of our constituents. It can't be beyond the wit of man that because the word pet is in there, that we can't trace these animals. Surely we can do something. Yeah.
Brings a good point up about, because during COVID that's also moved the movement of livestock much more online and has shown ways of traceability. So in addition of showing the age of the animal for sale, a recognised photograph, the commercial third-party sale of puppies and kittens has also been banned since the 6th of April 2020 in England, preventing commercial outlets from selling animals in England unless they themselves have bred them. In the case of puppies sold by licensed breeders, as I said before, they are prohibited from showing a puppy to a prospective purchaser unless the mum or the biological mum is also present. There is an exemption for the very limited circumstances where welfare concerns must take precedent. But as the Honourable Member for North Thanet pointed out, some of these unscrupulous breeders rarely think of the consequences of mum when they are doing this under the line. Alongside the statutory regulation of commercial pet breeders and pet sellers, we support the self-regulation of online platforms which sell pets. We do this through the close working relationship with the Pet Advertising Advisory Group, PAG, which was created to combat concerns regarding the irresponsible advertising of pets for sale and rehoming for exchange. Yes, of course.
Well, I have to say self-regulation, but aren't we agreeing that self-regulation isn't going to be enough? Are we going to go further?
So if he'll bear with me a little longer, PAG has been engaging with the online marketplaces to help them distinguish appropriate adverts from those that should be removed, and PAG has developed a set of minimum standards for advertising pets for sale. Several of the UK's largest classified websites have already adopted these minimum standards, which the government supports. DEFRA also runs a public communications campaign called Petfish, which we heard of earlier, raising the awareness of issues associated with low welfare and illegal supply of pets, including encouraging prospective buyers to research thoroughly. The current work in this area also includes progressing the Pet Theft Task Force recommendation made in September this year to encourage sales platforms to implement more identity checks. This is the work which we will approach through our existing relationship with PAG, including advertising requirements within the local authority licensing regime, serves an important purpose. It ensures that those with the power to issue, revoke, refuse or vary a licence can act where requirements aren't met, and builds on the local authority's ability to investigate, prosecute animal welfare issues under the Animal Welfare Act. The net result is a rounded approach that lets local authorities investigate local instances of low welfare, breeding, selling and pursue prosecutions where animal welfare standards are breached, and manage the licensing regime. Now, I have heard today those comments of many honourable members that say, actually, there are big gaps here. So I'd like to address very briefly. The honourable member for Hemel Hempstead spoke about mutilations of dogs, and the Kept Animals Bill includes a power to make regulations about the importation of pet animals into Great Britain for the purposes of promoting animal welfare, and it will enable us to clamp down on dogs which have been subject to low welfare practices such as ear cropping or tail docking. As I said to the honourable member for Rutherglen and Hamilton, we do have that regular contact with our Scottish counterparts, but she also, under the LAIA, it requires anyone selling rabbits as pets to obtain that valid licence like in any other area. Online sales, yes, DEFRA have responsibility to improve self-regulation through PAG and LAIA, but the other aspects do sit with DCMS, and I will come on to how we are working and intend to work more fully with them. The honourable member for Warrington South spoke about how particularly special dogs are to families and how parents need to be present. I would really urge people to make sure they are. As I say, we have heard about the Dotties and the Doras, and we have heard about how sad a home is when you lose your dog, from the honourable member from Hemel Hempstead. Online sales outside the UK resulting in animals being imported aren't captured by the current licensing regime. Neither are pets rehomed by rescue centres, but Kept Animals Bill will introduce further restrictions on imports to combat low welfare movements, and we are working towards licensing of rescue centres. So, as I conclude, as I say, we think there is a holistic approach, but I am well aware that the key stakeholders, trade associations, PAG, Pet Industry Federation, Canine and Feline Sector Group, will be integral to collecting evidence to inform DEFRA's review going forward. And in addition, I would welcome any evidence that Justice for Reggie may hold as to how we can improve this. Following this debate, I am going to ask officials to meet with Justice for Reggie in the coming days so we can take on board any information and evidence the campaign can provide which can assist our understanding of these issues. There will also be a roundtable with PAG and some of the online platforms in the new year, which Justice for Reggie would be welcome to attend to make their points in person. To conclude, the Government is proud of the improved protections that we've introduced and the ambitious and progressive reform programme, but there is further to go. I hope those present today have been reassured that we take this seriously and that we will work together across government and with those involved in order to improve the situation.
Christina Rees, to wind up very briefly.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. I thank all members for their valuable contributions to this very important debate, and we all agree that the government must act now. It's so terribly upsetting that unscrupulous people are making money from disreputable pet animal sales online. But the difference is that innocent people are being duped by unscrupulous pet sellers who don't care if the animals they are selling live or die, and these poor animals endure the most disgusting conditions. I don't understand how anyone can be cruel to a pet who only wants to give unrequited love. So I urge the Minister, who is very magnanimous and listens, to legislate to prevent people suffering the heartbreak that Richard has. And I thank Richard and his determination not to give up on justice for Reggie, and it's been an absolute honour to present Reggie's law for Richard in this debate this evening. Thank you.
Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.
Ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding